My inspiration for this leather candle holder was sparked after looking through various photos of esoteric altars. In almost all cases, there were candles. It occurred to me that despite the limitations of leather, I could safely make a flat base to house the small candles. I actually loved that despite promoting this as a candle holder, I'm sure there are a bunch of other uses. I'm excited to see how customers will incorporate this into their altars. As usual, I start with a roll of veg tan leather. This is approximately 2 to 2.5 mil thick, and I like to cut everything down into manageable strips that neatly fit in the template that I use to make the item. It makes it less unwieldy, having like large strips to work with. And as you can see here in the footage, I've got two pieces of card which I use to template out the leather, and I'm using that as a kind of like a rough guide to cut the leather into workable strips or pieces. And what you see there is the ruler that I'm using has like a flap on the top to protect my fingers when I'm using sharp knives. That's quite a nice little tool because Lord knows over the years I have slipped and had near misses or just like nicked myself. So having that nice guard there is pretty cool. You'll also see me now cut another piece, and despite the fact that I'm using the same bit of card, this is actually for two circle pieces that I'm going to need, but I'm just roughly cutting it out based on the width of the template. And here I am clipping in the piece of leather. I'll actually put both of the pieces of leather in here, and I will laser cut the shapes. Now, when I'm prototyping, I tend to use the laser cutter because it is super convenient to test out my ideas. What I prefer to do once I know something is working and will sell is I will get actual like die cuts ordered in to make them. It's actually quicker to stamp out leather using like die cutters than it is to use the laser cutter. And also the smell from the laser cutter is not great. So I try to avoid it if I can. So but like prototyping, I'm a huge fan of. Now this is me kind of like doing the first step again, cutting out pieces of pig suede because this is going to be sandwiched in between the leather. Now that pig suede I have stocked in 4 colors, although I think I only display 3. The missing color is red. Now here I'm casing the leather. Now the reason for casing the leather is because I'm going to be tooling it. So I'm going to be cutting it and creating indentations from different tools, hence the name tooling. And it just makes it easier to do so when the leather is slightly damp. And this is my collection of brass and 3D printed stamps that I have either made or had made for me. I like to have everything in brass if I can, because the 3D printed items don't last very long. But again, when it comes to prototyping or stamps that I'm probably not going to use very regularly or don't require a lot of detail, I can just 3D print. And here I'm using the brass stamps to create an impression into the underside of the leather. And this device is a clicker press, specifically a 4-ton clicker press. And you'll see me spin the leather around because my clicker press isn't quite flush like the top and the bottom. So I turn it around just to make sure that I get an even pressure on the stamps rather than just doing it one way around. And that card that we saw earlier is what I use to help align the stamps that I press into the leather. Okay, so here I'm using a swivel knife. Now, the purpose is not to cut all the way through the leather, but instead create a pattern. And for this particular design, I just thought it would be quite cool to have a line linking all of those circles up. I guess underneath it would work out to be some sort of triangle, if you viewed it that way. And because I'm making a couple of these leather candle holders in a row, you'll see me working on similar pieces at the same time. And I'm using the tool again here to create a star. Now, you'll see the star come up a lot in my designs. I really like it. And I guess it's turned into a bit of a signature piece for me. And at a sped up footage, you can see me cutting into the leather here, which gives me a great working point for the next set of tools, which I will use. Here we go. Which I'll use to compress the leather and make this star, or sun, I should say, stand out. I always find it quite satisfying to watch the process sped up. There you go. See how it stands out much better than just cutting into it. It's actually also my preferred method of tooling leather. I actually prefer that over using stamps in the clicker press. Don't get me wrong, there are benefits for both. It certainly takes a much longer to tool things than it does to stamp items using the clicker press. I really like this design. And those are the undersides of the bits that hold the tea candles. And here we go, dip dyeing the leather. It's the most, well, it's the quickest way, I find, to dye large pieces of leather. It also gives a very consistent look about it, but it does tend to dry out the leather. There's alcohol in the leather, and so when it evaporates, you find that the leather goes quite hard. So what I do to counteract this is use neat's foot oil in the leather, but we'll get to that in a moment. Here, I am using the same dye again in an airbrush, and this allows me to do some finer detailed work. You'll tend to find that when I'm using walnut dye, I will dye it twice. One will be dip dyed, so here you can see the dip dyed leather, and then I'll go over it again with multiple passes using the airbrush to give that darker, faded outside look, which I think really adds that aesthetic to it. I'm a huge fan of this. Obviously, it adds more time into the process of making my leather pieces, but it's one of those things that without it, I would feel like you would look at it and know it was missing something. But having this darker edge around the outside just ties it all together for me. Okay, here we are with the neat's foot oil. So this will help soften the leather again. And what it'll also do is help the dye kind of like go deeper into the leather. I can't think what the word is off the top of my head, but it's a very vital step, especially later on when it comes to construction, because it's making the leather a bit more malleable and easier to work with. It just makes that process a bit smoother. And I'm using sheepskin here to apply the oil. I tend to buy scraps of it on eBay for super cheap, and then I will just trim it down because it tends to be quite long. Now, I should say, even though we're only about 10 minutes into the video, what you're seeing is taking place over multiple days, because every time I do a process such as adding the oil or dyeing the leather or casing the leather, I have to wait for it to dry, and it just takes time. Speaking of drying, with the oil now dry, I take it to the buffing wheel, and from what I can tell, what's happening when I'm doing this is that A, it's removing any excess oil off the top, but because the friction from the buffing wheel warms up the leather. I genuinely think it kind of like reactivates that oil inside of the leather, and then you end up with a really nice shiny finish. Otherwise, up until this point, it kind of looks a little bit chalky. Okay, the next step is to use the airbrush again, but this time to apply Resolene, which is an acrylic protective coat to put over the leather. This just helps with things like spillages and staining. Now, you're going to notice that using this airbrush, I actually swapped. I have one airbrush for dyeing and one for the Resolene. You'll see it's not coming out very well. The nozzle was slightly blocked, and I was having to really fight it to try and get it out. But needless to say, I cleaned it afterwards. So we saw earlier in the video that I was cutting out pieces of pig suede. Well, this is me now just laying the suede onto the leather piece ready to be sandwiched. And I'm just scoring around it so I know where to apply my contact adhesive. This contact adhesive is water-based, so it doesn't smell. I also find it's easier to work with than things like barge because it's very smooth. It doesn't tend to clump up. It's just much easier to work with. The hardest part of this process is trying to stay within the lines. Now, doing this bit of leather here isn't particularly difficult, but when it comes to doing the suede, I found that one a lot more difficult to glue, especially when it came to doing the edges, because I really tried not to get any leather on the facing side. I tried not to get any glue on the facing side of the leather because it would be very, very difficult to get that back off again. Whereas getting dried glue off leather isn't particularly difficult, and you'll see me doing that a little bit later on. Oh, this is another a pain to do, trying to put these two pieces of leather together so I can score the 3 lines, and then trying to get the glue without on the leather without going over the lines. I kind of wish I had a better way of doing this. It is a bit fiddly, but this whole piece is honestly a little bit fiddly, especially when I actually go to assemble everything, because the little holes you see around the outside of the main piece are stitch lines, and those like stitching holes need to line up with the piece underneath. That's a little bit difficult as well. This was quite a satisfying moment for me, putting these two pieces together. It's not particularly hard to do this because I leave myself with a little bit of wiggle room so that I don't have to be perfectly exact with it. I just need to make sure that I'm not covering any of those stitch holes up. And I use this little roller device to help push that suede down into the glue. Yeah, here's a really fiddly bit. Lining this all together. Now you'll see the little device that I've got there. It's like a pointy bit of metal. I use it for scoring, but here you'll see me scoring again, ready to do the outline of the suede and get that all glued into place. The idea here is not to apply too much glue, so that's all sloppy, but so that it's just I'm almost like applying the glue and then trying to brush it back off again just to leave the residue. And that I find that works really well. If you leave it on there too thick, it doesn't quite dry properly, or you end up with clumps, which, as I mentioned earlier, isn't that bad of a deal with this particular type of glue, but still I try to avoid it. I also inevitably get glue in those stitch holes, but again, I'll kind of show you how I got that back out afterwards. So with everything tacky now, I'm just trying to flatten out the leather and then I'll get a jig, which I will push the leather against. And it kind of helps me align the two pieces, not necessarily the circle bits, but the main circles. I'm not even sure if that even sounds right as I say it. And you can see here that I definitely went over the lines when it came to applying the glue on the base piece, because you can see it like in those circles there. Okay, so this is kind of like the nightmare piece that I want to make sure doesn't go wrong. Because when you put two pieces of leather together that have got contact cement on them, as soon as they touch, it just likes to grab and not let go. And I've ruined pieces of leather before by trying to pry them apart. So this is kind of a case of you get one shot at this. And this is where I use that pointy tool just to help with registration. So I poke through two of the thread holes, which I know are aligned correctly. And then I'll kind of like push the leather down in that area. And then I'll move the tool down about an inch or so. And I'll just keep repeating that process to ensure that as I am clamping that leather together with my fingers, that the holes are lining up. Is it perfect? No. Does it get me 99% of the way there? Yes, definitely. I can't think of another good way of doing it. And here we are back at the clicker press. And this is where I use the 4 tons of pressure to help bind those two pieces of leather together. Make sure that there's like real adhesion between everything. Whilst it's also doing that, it ensures that the leather is being flattened back out again. Okay, now I'll go along with these pliers. I can't think of the proper name for them, but you'll see that they're wrapped in a little bit of leather to make sure that the tool doesn't leave any unwanted impressions in the leather. And I'll just go all the way around, just ensuring that the edges are completely closed. Because if they're not, when it comes to doing the edging afterwards, it can cause a bit of problem. But this just ensures that everything is nice and tidy, ready to work with. Okay, time to sand those edges. So where I've put two pieces of leather together, this just ensures that everything's nice and flush, because no matter how hard I try, it will never be perfect. But sanding this down just helps with that process. Smooths everything off quite nicely. However, when I do this process, the main sides, the left and the right, if you're looking at it now, kind of like bloat out, and it leaves like an unsightly edge. In a moment, we're going to deal with that, but I just wanted to make you aware that that edge is caused by the sanding process. It's actually quite nice to see the color changing as everything gets stripped back, because it helps me know where I have been and where I need to keep sanding. And this is where I use a bevel edger to get rid of those unsightly edges that are caused by the sander. It's actually one of my favorite tools. The sound and the feel, it doesn't come across in the video of doing this process is great. What I should have done really before starting is strop my stool just to make it easier to cut into the leather, because I'm having to add a bit of pressure here, and you shouldn't really need to add pressure. The tool should really be gliding as it cuts. So whilst it's trimming the edges, it's also giving it a slight bevel. Just makes the texture of it feel nicer in your hand when you're holding the leather piece, because you don't have anything sharp feeling in your hand. Okay, so this I referred to earlier on, removing some of the excess glue from the holes. This particular like rubber or piece of rubber is marketed and designed for removing contact cement from materials. The glue, the excess glue, just loves to like cling onto this rubber. And so just rubbing it over the edges helps clear up a lot of the glue that's still in there, even though the glue's dry. When I come to sew shortly, that will also help unclog any sewing holes that need attention. And here I'm just putting an undercoat of dye onto the edges. This just makes sure that when I'm doing the acrylic painting afterwards, that if I do happen to miss some spots, it doesn't show up particularly, because having the lighter undyed leather, if I don't quite get 100% coverage, stands out way more than having the dyed undercoat. These mark pens are sold empty, and you can put whatever you want in there. My trick is to put dye in there and use it as like a leather dye marker pen. It works incredibly well. And this is the tool that I'll be using to paint the edges of the leather using an acrylic edge coat. This particular one, I think, is a light brown off the top of my head. And this wheel sits over the top of it, or I guess within it. And as you roll that drum around, it picks up the dye, or the paint, I should say, as you can see here. So the trick is just to run the whole thing through in one go, and it'll add that acrylic edge, which gives it a great finish afterwards. I'll do this in 2 coats. The first coat I'll probably let sit there for 20 minutes, maybe 30, and then I'll go around again just to give it full exposure to the edge. I'm kind of doing this awkwardly because I'm having to work around the camera. So here I'm using tiger thread as its name. The thickness I'm using is 0.8 mil, I think, off the top of my head. And what you see me doing here is saddle stitching. Now, because I am using or require a lot of thread to go all the way around, I'm actually doing this in 2 halves. Otherwise, if I had a really super long piece of thread, it would be really difficult to work with, at least at the beginning. So you'll see that I'll start on one edge, and then I'll take it all the way through to the other edge. Then I'll clip the thread, and then I will do another pass on the other side. And I just put that all together and tie it all very nicely and neatly. So you can see here I've got some loose thread on this side and the other side. And because I'm using polyester, it just means that when I come to clip these edges with the lighter, it just means the plastic burns down and seals really well. And I'll go in with a hammer here just to hammer down that thread and protect it. Very satisfying feeling putting that piece into the base. And you see me assembling this now. The inside is EVA foam that I cut out bespoke on the laser cutter. Now I'm told this is recyclable, which is a bonus. And you can see I get to have a little bit of fun with the packaging because I get to make like these really satisfying placements for everything. And then I'll finish that off with a certificate of authenticity. And then I'll add the letter and photos afterwards. And there you have it. That is the leather candle holder. I'm excited to see how you use this. Be sure to share your photos in social media.